Hi, friends. I'm Sean, host of the Stories That Empower podcast. I'm so glad you're here. If you're struggling right now, I want you to know there's hope and light for you. Every week, I interview someone just like you who's overcome a challenge, loss, setback, or trauma. I can't wait to share the nuggets of life wisdom that are embedded in their life stories. Please know this: you are not alone, you are loved. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider making a donation to help offset the production cost at storiesthatempower.com. I've got a great guest for you today, so let's get started. My guest today is Alan Mendenhall. Alan is a lawyer, the Associate Dean and Professor at Troy University, and he's the author of several books, including A Glooming Peace This Morning. Welcome, Alan. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, of course. Alan, we want to get to know you. Take a moment and share with us a bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you. As you mentioned, am an administrator in a business school, but that's not really my background. In fact, I never even took a business class in college. I am a lawyer with a PhD in English, whose first love is literature, and A Glooming Peace This Morning is my first novel. I'm very excited about it. It took a long time to write, even though it is a very, very short novel, and I just really am honored to be able to talk to you a little bit about it today.
Wonderful. This is actually a great time for us to do a deep dive into your story. So, Alan, please take it away.
Well, I know that your podcast is a story of hope, inspiration, and empowerment. And I've always been motivated when people tell me no. My grandfather used to say, "Can't, never could." And my entire career has involved the pursuit of goals that somebody told me were impossible to meet. So I went to law school and got a master's in English in the evenings. And people said, "You can't do that. You can't do a dual degree program. You can't possibly take master's credits at night while you are studying for law school. Law school's too much." And that just motivated me to work even harder and to do that. I got my PhD in English while I was practicing law. People told me, "You couldn't do that. You'll never do that. You'll never be a good attorney. You'll never be able to finish." I taught while practicing law because I always had an aspiration to eventually do higher education. And people told me, "You couldn't do that." And then they told me, "Well, you can't become a law professor either because you didn't go to Harvard or Yale. Only Ivy Leaguers can become law professors." And so I sought out to prove them wrong, and was an administrator, associate dean in a law school before I moved to a business school. And in terms of writing books, I can remember getting critiqued as an undergraduate student by professors who would read some form of writing or another. And rather than being defeated, I would take that criticism and run with it. It would motivate me to try to do better, to try to prove to people that I could do what, in fact, they did not think I could do.
It's interesting you say that because I think let's assume for a moment that I represent the average person. I think the average person, or I could see myself feeling crushed by those setbacks, and allowing myself to believe that. But you've chosen time and time again not to allow that to become your reality. So I think that's fascinating. How would you say you were able to stay focused, stay the course, and not allow that chatter, that noise to impact you?
Well, I think I've always been inspired by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I don't necessarily agree with everything Emerson says or writes or teaches, but I do find him to be exhilarating to read and inspirational. And I think that a lot of his emphasis on sort of self-reliance and insisting on yourself, never imitate, working hard, um, to put your heart into your work, and be independent. That has always resonated with me, and I found it empowering and inspiring. And I wouldn't, attribute sort of tenacity, all the tenacity that I've experience to Emerson, but I would certainly say that that type of attitude that Emerson projects has always been attractive to me, and I've sort of adopted it as my own in some manifestation or another.
Another question I have for you, Alan, is so I think you said growing up, your father, you had people close to you, perhaps your father you mentioned, said no or something. Would you say that was any factor into your mindset and your outlook?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the influences of friends and family certainly. I was blessed to be raised in what now I guess we would call somewhat of a position of privilege. My family was not rich, but we, were upper middle class, and my parents, I had a two-parent household, and they were both very keen on ensuring that I received a good education. And I sort of disliked that framing and characterization of the word privilege because of its association with sort of shame and the requirement of atonement, and also the sense of sort of anger and resentment that comes with people who maybe don't enjoy that. I actually prefer the term blessings because there's still a sense of the undeserved, of the sense that I was born to parents that I didn't choose and into circumstances I didn't choose through no merit of my own, but just for sheer luck. But with the framing of the term as blessings rather than privilege, I think you have an emphasis on gratitude and obligation, the sense of to whom much is given, much is required. And I think that term privilege sometimes involves a lot of sort of politicized rhetoric. But if you start thinking about it in terms of blessings, like I said, again, it still captures that sense of the undeserved, but it also emphasizes the importance of doing for those that maybe didn't have the same set of circumstances that you grew up. So, all that's to say, I couldn't be who I am today. I couldn't have authored books and written books without the influence of parents and teachers and a community that I did not choose, that just were, I was just fortunate. I was blessed and lucky that they were in my life. But on the other hand, I can remember in high school going into the library rather than going into the lunchroom with friends and reading and working and studying in the lunchroom, or in college when friends went out to go party, I stayed in the library and studied. So there's definitely an element of work ethic that goes into achieving goals and accomplishing tasks that you've always set for yourself.
And do you find, speaking of that, as you set goals for yourself and you achieve them, do you find that you're reaching a saturation point, or there's always always, higher goals that you can set for yourself?
Well, I always have many, many projects going on simultaneously, and sometimes I don't really have a deadline for them. I just start working on one project and working on another project. And then somehow, when one project is nearing completion, I'm motivated to move all my energy toward that one project and finish that one. And that's kind of how I write books. I work a little bit on multiple books at one time, and then all of a sudden, one seems close to being done. So I'll reallocate my time and resources toward finishing that particular book. But in terms of like career goals, I don't really ever set those. I mean, I have no idea where my career is headed. I don't really know. I just try to um, do the best I can with the job or task before me, and then let doors open. I've never gotten a job that I've applied for or looked for in my entire life. Every single job I've gotten has been through some connection or some door that opened unexpectedly. And I find that if you focus your efforts on what you are are facing at that particular time and do the best you can do, that your reputation grows and word spreads, and people are willing to advocate for you and recommend you for other opportunities that maybe you didn't foresee or maybe you weren't looking for, and maybe these opportunities are better than the ones you were looking for.
What's also fascinating about you, Alan, is that to me, you strike me as someone who, like, you are your own coach, you're your own motivator, you're your own cheerleader. And I think that's pretty cool. And my question to you is, so as associate dean and professor, university professor, do you find that that comes across, as you're interacting with your students or the university students, as motivating them, providing encouragement, inspiration and empowerment? Would you say that that comes out?
I certainly hope so. I don't know that I'm always my best self, but I try to be as good of a teacher as I can. I am currently teaching in fields that I didn't expect to teach in. I teach business law classes, and had you asked me 10, 15 years ago what I would be teaching, I probably would have said, modern 20th century American poetry or something. And up until recently, I was teaching humanities courses when I was a associate dean of a law school. I actually was an administrator in the law school, but my teaching was principally in other departments. So I taught in the English department. I taught an American literature survey. I taught a British literature survey that went from Beowulf to lyrical ballads, and I taught Western civilization and humanities courses. So to transition into these business courses has been very different for me. Of course, I'm a lawyer, so teaching business law isn't entirely alien, but it is not something I ever would have expected to teach. And I do try to bring humanities texts to bear on the curriculum. I try to teach sort of great books curriculum as much as I can to integrate sort of humanities learning into business context, because I think that's really important. I think business students need that humanities background, and I actually think humanities students need a business background, because no matter what, um, the questions that have always the sort of perennial questions that have always been with us about what it means to be a human and what the human condition is and how we treat one another are never going to go away. And if we can learn to think critically and effectively about those questions, understanding that there are people who will disagree with us, and that we need to learn how to disagree civilly and constructively. I think that's really important in a society that's increasingly fractured and politicized. We have to learn to understand our differences and to be able to talk through them, not always with the goal of changing minds, because few people are going to actually change other people's minds, among adults especially. And I think people need to go into conversations not with the goal to win them, but to seek clarity and understanding. And if you can seek clarity and understanding, that is the win. The win is not changing people's mind. The win is understanding other people's minds.
Alan, I want to take a moment and commend you because I sense a lot of humility about you. I think you have achieved a lot in your life, and you continue to achieve a lot, but you are very grounded, very humble. The other thing that's kind of neat about you is I sense that you trust and that you're open. And just by you continuing to do that, good things tend to come to you. So I just want to take a moment and commend you for that.
Thank you.
What I want to ask you next is, Alan, what would you feel that you've learned from the story that you shared with us?
I would say of all the philosophers, thinkers, theoreticians out there, the one who has influenced me the most is a man named Friedrich Hayek. And his entire epistemology is predicated not on how much you know, but on how much you don't know, on the fallibility of the human mind, of the partiality and selectivity of human memory. And I think that type of humility is an important starting point for inquiry, because to learn, to actually contribute to the sum of knowledge, you have to have an open mind. You have to come into questions without foregone conclusions, and you have to pursue lines of inquiry wherever they will lead, even if they lead to places that you don't like, to conclusions that you don't agree with. And you have to have that openness of mind in order to pursue the truth, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with facts, reality, and truth. And if you are basing your decisions on things that aren't compatible with facts and reality and truth, then you're not setting good direction for yourself. If you are setting goals and ambitions and taking political positions based on hunches or guesses or priors or biases, then you probably are going to find yourself at some dead ends and not have the most constructive interaction, uh, constructive relationships with people who disagree with you. I'll put it that way. And so there has to be um, a suspension of judgment. I think a willingness to put your own proclivities and tendencies to the side and to analyze circumstances as dispassionately as possible. We always bring our passions and our perspectives to bear on any issue that we analyze, but the ability to be able to set those aside and as much as possible and seek out truth, facts, and reality is, I think, indispensable to civil society. I mean, that is an approach that is necessary for people to learn how to get along because disagreement, conflict, they're inevitable. The best we can hope for in a civil society is to keep disagreement and conflict at the level of rhetoric and discourse so that it doesn't degenerate into something like violence.
It's refreshing to hear you say that. I wish that wisdom, I wish we would hear that wisdom more often on a daily basis. So, I think it can be very helpful to all of us. Hi, friends. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Tiffany Vakilian. She lights up the world with her energy. I was so humbled to hear how she transformed her losses and setbacks into energy to empower others. Tiffany uses her fire to ignite others and encourages them to share their stories. You've got to check out all of her wonderful services at Tiffany, Tiffany, Vakilian, VAKILIAN.com. And Alan, you've already shared several awesome resources. Any additional resources, such as a quote, a book, a website that helped you in your journey?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm very taken by some quotes by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I mean, one that stands out is be yourself, no base imitator of another, but your best self. There is something which you can do better than another. Another one is the great man is he who, in the midst of a crowd, keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. Because I think we get caught up in the noise of the everyday. We have 24-hour news cycles. Our phones are constantly dinging with text messages, our news alerts, and we forget how important it is to have solitude. People tend to think of solitude as being a negative thing now, but really we need time with ourselves in order to understand ourselves. And not until we understand ourselves can we learn the proper way to act in a crowd, how to be your own self, even when you are among the masses, as it were. So I think Emerson's Emerson's sage advice to insist on yourself and never imitate is important. I think we need to be who it is we are, and we need to understand who it is that we are. And that, of course, does not mean that we don't have some sense of the common good or some sense of community. But what it means is that we understand more deeply our place in that community and the role that we can play in contributing to sort of the aggregate good.
Alan, I have really enjoyed speaking with you here today. I feel you're making such a positive impact in people's lives. I'm going to summarize your nuggets of wisdom. Put your heart into your work, be independent, seek clarity and understanding. I think this is one of my favorite things that you mentioned, that humility can be a starting point towards inquiry, for us to seek out truth, facts, and reality, and to have solitude. We want to stay connected with you because we're excited about all of your wonderful books, including A Glooming Peace This Morning. So please tell us how we can do that, and then we'll say goodbye.
Well, thank you. Probably the easiest way is just to go to my website, which is www.alanmendenhall.com, and that's ALLENMENDENHALL.
Alan, thank you so much for trusting me to share your story.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it and enjoyed our time together.